Welcome everybody to the 2025 WNBA Finals presented by YouTube TV. We'll begin with remarks from Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, and then we'll turn it over.
Something massive just dropped involving the WNBA, its commissioner, and the woman who has completely transformed the entire league. And if you thought Caitlin Clark's 2025 season was a storyline, you have absolutely no idea what's coming next. The commissioner of the WNBA just went on national television and said something about Clark that nobody expected. And it changes everything heading into 2026. Before we get into that, though, you need to understand how we even got here. Because the road to this moment has been one of the wildest, most dramatic rides in women's sports history. Let's rewind to 2024. Caitlin Clark enters the WNBA, and immediately the league transforms overnight. Television ratings explode. Arenas sell out. Tickets for Indiana Fever games start reselling at prices that rival NBA playoff games. Merchandise flies off shelves. Sponsors come flooding in. Every broadcast, every highlight reel, every trending topic on social media, her name is in the middle of it. The WNBA had been growing steadily for years, but this was different. This was a full-on cultural explosion, and Clark was the one who lit the fuse. But even as the league was riding this wave of attention and money unlike anything it had seen before, something dark was brewing underneath the surface. A storm between the league's leadership and its players that would eventually explode in the most public way possible. The 2025 season was supposed to be where it all came together. Clark was coming off a historic rookie campaign. The Indiana Fever were building momentum. Fans were locked in. Sponsors were doubling down. And then, it all fell apart. Clark went down with injuries. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. A right groin strain ultimately shut her down for the entire postseason after she'd played just 13 games all season long. 13 games. And even in those 13 games, she was averaging 16.5 points, 8.8 assists, and 5.0 rebounds per game. The talent was there. The body just wasn't cooperating. Meanwhile, Indiana still managed to fight their way to the brink of the WNBA Finals before falling to the Las Vegas Aces in the semifinals. But that injury-shortened season set up a bigger conversation, one that had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with money, power, and the future of the entire league. Because while Clark was in rehab, the WNBA and its players' union were about to go to war. Now, the collective bargaining agreement between the league and the WNBPA was heading toward expiration. And the two sides were miles apart. Players wanted revenue sharing. They wanted dramatically higher salaries. They wanted chartered flights for every team, better facilities, more investment in their careers. The league kept pointing to something called sustainability every time the players asked for more. And the players were furious. Napheesa Collier, one of the league's biggest stars, went scorched earth in her end-of-season press conference. She called the WNBA front office the worst leadership in the world. She didn't whisper it. She said it loud and the entire league heard it. Players from every team immediately lined up behind her, voicing support and piling on with their own frustrations. The commissioner, Cathy Engelbert, was suddenly in the most uncomfortable position of her career. And then came the most explosive allegation of all. Collier alleged that Commissioner Engelbert had told her directly that Caitlin Clark and players like her should be on their knees in gratitude for what the WNBA platform had given them, suggesting that without the league, Clark would be making nothing. That statement detonated like a bomb. Social media went absolutely haywire. Former players, current players, fans, media personalities, everyone had something to say. Was the commissioner of the WNBA really that dismissive of her own star player? Was she really downplaying the role that Caitlin Clark had played in making the league what it was becoming? Engelbert pushed back hard, denying the comment at a press conference ahead of the WNBA Finals. She called Clark a transformational player for the league. She said the reports were filled with inaccuracies. She said she was disheartened. She said she and the league needed to do better. But the damage was done. Trust between the players and league leadership had cracked. And heading into the winter of 2025, nobody knew if there would even be a 2026 season at all. The negotiations got ugly. Deadline after deadline passed with no agreement. January came and there was still no deal. The league triggered an automatic revenue share of around $8 million from benchmarks in the old CBA. But that felt like crumbs compared to what the players were asking for. Clark herself weighed in publicly, telling the world during a USA basketball training camp at Duke University that this moment was too important to waste, that the league needed to find a way to play basketball in 2026, no matter what. The players' union responded by saying they completely agreed with her, but that the league itself was the one refusing to move. It was Clark, the league's biggest star, essentially calling out both sides and demanding a resolution. And she did it in the most composed, diplomatic way imaginable, which only made the contrast with the league's slow-moving negotiations more stark. Fans were watching all of this unfold in real time, and the pressure was building by the day. Then, in the middle of March 2026, something happened that nobody was sure would ever actually come. After months of brutal, drawn-out negotiations, sessions that reportedly ran until 4 o'clock in the morning, 10-hour marathon meetings, teams of lawyers going back and forth over language and numbers and percentages, the WNBA and the Players' Union finally reached a verbal agreement on a brand-new, landmark 7-year collective bargaining agreement. 7 years, the longest deal in league history. And the numbers attached to it were jaw-dropping. The salary cap, which had been sitting at just $1.5 million in 2025, was set to jump to $7 million. Immediately, a staggering increase of over 360%. In a single year, the Supermax salary started at $1.40 million. Average player salaries were projected to land around $600,000, with minimum salaries rising above $300,000. For the first time ever, and every single player in the league would benefit from a full revenue sharing model. No thresholds to hit, no triggers needed. Commissioner Engelbert called it the beginning of a bold new era. And then she went on national television and said something that made it crystal clear just how central Caitlin Clark is to all of it. Engelbert appeared on ESPN's Pat McAfee Show to discuss the new CBA. And when the conversation turned to Clark, the commissioner didn't hold back. She praised Clark's influence on the league's growth in terms that were striking given everything that had happened over the past year. She talked about how the league was playing 32 games when she first came in as commissioner, and now, under the new deal, teams would eventually be able to play up to 52 games over the life of the agreement. That growth, she made clear, is directly tied to the stars that have made the WNBA impossible to ignore. Clark, she said, had been a huge part of the league's rise. Then Engelbert took things a step further. She specifically called out Clark's work as a guest analyst for NBC's NBA coverage during the 2026 off-season, saying she couldn't be prouder of how Clark was handling her moment. That word, proud, was enormous, just months after an alleged comment about Clark being ungrateful. The commissioner was now publicly beaming about her in front of millions of people, and that pivot matters more than most people realize, because here's what the NBC situation actually means for Clark and for the league. During the off-season, while recovering from her injuries and waiting for the WNBA season to resume, when Clark had joined NBC as a guest analyst for pre-game coverage of NBA games, she made her debut in February, sitting courtside ahead of a matchup between the Los Angeles Lakers and the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden. She returned again in late March for coverage of Oklahoma City's game against the Knicks. Every single time she appeared, the social media engagement was through the roof. People were watching NBA pregame coverage, which is not exactly appointment television for most fans, specifically because Caitlin Clark was sitting at the desk. NBC knew it, the league knew it, and now the commissioner was on a major national program, essentially blessing and celebrating it. The message being sent was unmistakable. Clark is not just a WNBA player, she is a crossover star. She and the league wants the world to know she belongs on every platform, and Clark wasn't just making television appearances during the off-season. She had spent 8 grueling months rehabilitating from her 2025 injuries, and when she finally returned to competitive basketball, she did it on the biggest stage possible, representing the United States of America at the 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The U.S. went 5-0 in the tournament, and Clark was named tournament MVP. The first time the world got a real look at her since her injury-shortened WNBA season. She was playing for her country and dominating. She was moving freely. Her shooting range was back. The playmaking, the decision-making, the leadership in critical moments, all of it was there. Her own words said everything you needed to know. Well, she said she finally felt like herself again. She said she was really healthy. She said it was crazy to think 8 months had passed and that she missed playing in front of fans in every single city. That last part wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration that the Caitlin Clark the world fell in love with was fully back. Which brings us to what Indiana Fever fans have been dreaming about all off-season. Clark went on NBC's NBA coverage and said something that immediately started trending across every sports platform on the internet. She said the Fever were going to be the favorites to win it all in 2026. Not a contender, not a dark horse, the favorite. She acknowledged the roster challenges, with over 100 players across the league entering free agency in one of the wildest off-season reshuffles in WNBA history, and the Fever weren't even sure who most of their teammates would be. But Clark was crystal clear about the priorities. She said bringing back Kelsey Mitchell was the #1 objective. Mitchell had been first-team All-WNBA and had been Clark's primary backcourt partner, and losing her would be a massive blow to everything the Fever were trying to build. Clark also spoke about Aaliyah Boston's importance to the team's core, and the challenge of managing the salary cap when multiple cornerstone players would be commanding max-level contract in the same window. Here's where the money situation gets genuinely complicated. Under the new CBA, the salary cap starts at $7 million in 2026. Kelsey Mitchell is in line for a max deal. Aaliyah Boston became max eligible this off-season, and Clark herself will become max eligible next year. And if the Fever sign all 3 of those players to maximum deals, the trio alone would eat up nearly half the cap in 2026 and potentially more than half in subsequent years. That is an enormous amount of roster construction pressure. You can build a championship team around 3 elite players, but the margins get razor thin. Every other roster spot becomes a calculated gamble. Depth becomes your vulnerability. Injuries, the exact thing that derailed Indiana in 2025, become even more devastating when your salary structure is top-heavy. The Fever front office has some genuinely difficult decisions ahead of them, and how those decisions play out will define not just the 2026 season, but the next several years of the franchise. But let's talk about the bigger picture here. In because even the Fever's roster challenges exist within a league that looks almost unrecognizable compared to just a few years ago. The 2026 season will be the WNBA's 30th anniversary. 2 new expansion teams, the Toronto Tempo and the Portland Fire, are joining the league, bringing the total number of franchises to 14. The expansion draft, held April 3rd, allowed those new teams to select players from existing rosters, with each current team able to protect only 5 players. An absolutely wild free agency period is about to follow, with more than 80% of the league's players hitting the open market simultaneously. An unprecedented situation created entirely by the delay in CBA negotiations. There he has nearly every veteran in the league had signed short-term deals specifically to set themselves up for the massive pay increases in the new agreement. The WNBA draft is scheduled for April 13th. Training camps open April 19th, and the season itself tips off on May 8th. An opening night for Caitlin Clark and the Fever, May 9th at home in Gainbridge Fieldhouse against Paige Bueckers and the Dallas Wings. That game alone is going to break streaming records, because Paige Bueckers is now in the picture in a very real way. After her own extraordinary rise through the college ranks at UConn, Bueckers is set to enter the WNBA and immediately become one of its most recognizable faces. The Clark versus Bueckers dynamic, 2 generational talents, 2 transcendent college careers, could now on opposite sides of a professional court, is exactly the kind of matchup that draws casual fans in and keeps them watching. The WNBA brass knows this. The networks know this. Sponsors know this. And the commissioner going out of her way to praise Clark in public right before the season begins is part of a deliberate strategy to build the narrative that this 30th season is unlike anything the league has ever produced. From a pure entertainment standpoint, that's not an overstatement. Now, here's the layer that most people aren't talking about. The fact that Engelbert went on national television and specifically praised Clark's work for NBC is significant, not just as a feel-good moment. It represents a complete 180 from the tension that existed between the league's leadership and its players less than a year ago. When Nafisa Collier called out Engelbert's leadership and cited that explosive alleged comment about Clark's gratitude, the entire league felt the fracture. Players and fans were watching to see whether the commissioner would course correct or double down. The new CBA was the structural answer. The Pat McAfee Show appearance was the cultural answer. By publicly praising Clark's crossover appeal and broadcasting versatility, Engelbert was doing something very deliberate. She was tying the league's future to Clark's brand in the most visible way possible. And she was doing it in a setting that reaches a massive mainstream audience. Whether you read that as genuine admiration or as savvy positioning, the effect is the same. The commissioner and the league's biggest star are now publicly aligned heading into 2026. And that alignment matters because of what Clark represents for the new CBA's revenue-sharing component. The whole premise of giving players a share of league and team revenue only works if that revenue keeps growing. And the revenue keeps growing as long as the product keeps drawing viewers, sponsors, and ticket buyers at historic rate. Clark is the single biggest driver of all 3 of those metrics. That's not an opinion. That's backed up by television ratings, ticket sales data, merchandise numbers, and the documented explosion in league-wide sponsorship dollars. When Engelbert says the league now has the infrastructure to play up to 52 games over the life of the new agreement, she's describing a future built on the assumption that the kind of fan engagement Clark generates isn't a fluke. It's a foundation. And if that foundation holds, if Clark stays healthy, if Indiana contends, if the marquee matchups deliver, then the new CBA's revenue-sharing model will pour money into players' pockets at a rate the league has never seen. The interests are completely aligned in a way they weren't a year ago. That's the real story behind the commissioner's message. So, what exactly should you expect from Caitlin Clark in 2026? Based on everything we know, her health update after FIBA, her own words on NBC, the way she was moving in Puerto Rico, she is fully locked in.